The pine forests of the Pacific Northwest had stretched out before us since we left Seattle. We had been on the road for 3 hours, and the last traces of civilization had been left behind half an hour ago. I was still unsure whether we should turn off Highway 101 onto this old forest road, but Frankie had found a beautiful spot on the map, and we were going there. There was a campground near the lake at the foot of the Cascade Mountains. It was going to be a perfect weekend. I'm a software engineer. After so many years spent in front of a screen, the idea of spending 3 days in nature sounded very appealing. Simon was listening to music with headphones in the back seat. Frankie was next to me, looking at his phone, checking the offline map. We had a simple plan: leave on Friday evening, hike on Saturday, return on Sunday. What could possibly go wrong? The sun was beginning to set. The light filtering through the trees was orange. The road narrowed and narrowed, the asphalt giving way to a dirt path. The GPS signal was gone, but Frankie's downloaded offline map was working. According to Frankie, we were 10 kilometers from the camp. As we continued driving calmly, I suddenly saw something on the road. A huge Douglas fir tree had fallen right across the middle of the road. I hit the brakes, the tires skidded, the ABS kicked in. The car stopped a meter in front of the tree. My heartbeat was pounding in my ears. Simon took off his headphones. "What happened?" he asked. I didn't answer. I just stared at the tree. Its massive trunk completely blocked the road. There was no way around it. We looked helplessly at the road, searching for a solution. Frankie leaned forward, squinting as he examined the tree. "This is a fresh cut." He was right. The cut surface was clean, with the saw marks visible. The leaves were still green. It must have been cut just a few hours ago. But who would do such a thing? Forest workers wouldn't leave it like this. They would at least put up a warning sign. I got out of the car. The air was cold, and white steam came out of my mouth. I approached the tree and placed my hand on the cut surface. The resin was still wet and very fresh. The forest was silent. There were no birdsong, not even the rustle of leaves, only the sound of my own breathing. Simon and Frankie had also gotten out of the car. The three of us stood around the tree, wondering what to do. It would take an hour and a half to get back. It would be difficult to find an alternative route before dark, but waiting here wasn't a solution either. "Look over there." Frankie pointed towards the forest. Among the trees, far away, there was a small light. A yellow light flickering. It must be a cabin. Maybe it was the forest ranger's cabin. Maybe we could get help. "Let's go," I said. We didn't know what that light was, but we had no other choice. We grabbed our flashlights. There was still no signal on our phones, but the GPS was working. I marked our location, and we started walking toward the light. The forest was much darker than it appeared from the road. The pine trees were so dense that the sky was almost invisible. Pine cones crunched under our feet. With every step, we grew a little more uneasy, but we kept walking. We walked 200 meters. We needed to get closer to the light, but it seemed like we weren't getting any closer. I stopped and checked the GPS. There was no problem, but the light was still just as far away. "Let's keep going," said Frankie. We walked for about 10 more minutes, and finally, we saw the cabin. It was a small wooden structure. Yellow light was shining through the window. A thin wisp of smoke was rising from the chimney. There were piles of chopped wood around it, and in the corner, a large pickup truck was parked. We got a little closer to the house. I peeked inside. It looked like a typical hunter's cabin. Outside the cabin, many cutting tools like saws and axes were hanging. There were other items like chains and ropes. Frankie knocked on the door. No one answered. He knocked again, but there was no sound. Someone must have been inside because the light was on. Just then, a sound came from behind the cabin. It sounded like something metal hitting the ground. We turned around, scared, and looked in that direction. A man appeared from the shadows. He was tall with broad shoulders. He had an axe in his hand. "Hello, we're coming from the road. A tree has fallen and blocked the way. Can you help us?" The man approached. When the light hit his face, I saw something that made my stomach turn. There was a cold, angry look in his eyes. "You need to leave here, now." "Immediately. We want to leave, but the tree is in the way." "I cut that tree down." The man gripped the axe tightly. "I cut it down so no one would come. But they keep coming. They come despite my warnings." I took a step back. This man seemed unstable and dangerous. "Just help us clear the path." The man said to us indifferently, "You can't leave before morning now." He nodded toward the dark forest. They come every night, for you." "Who?" The man smiled, but there was fear in his eyes, a deep, ancient fear. "You'll find out soon enough." Then he turned and went into the cabin. He slammed the door shut and locked it. We froze for a moment and looked at each other. Then Simon whispered, "Let's go." We turned and started walking. We walked quickly, almost running. We had to get back to the car. We would wait there through the night. We wanted to find an alternate route in the morning and leave this place. Suddenly, we heard a sound. From far away, from the depths of the forest, came a howling sound. But it wasn't a wolf's howl. It was a deeper sound, more painful, as terrifying as a lion's roar. We stopped and looked at each other. "Run!" We started running without looking back. The light from our flashlight swayed left and right. Branches scratched our faces. Roots tripped our feet. Sounds were coming from behind us. Not just one sound, 2, 3, maybe more. Howls, growls, human-like, but not quite. I checked the GPS. The signal was gone. The screen went dark. It wasn't working. "This way." Simon turned right. We followed him. Everything looked the same. Every tree, every shadow, everything was identical. And then we saw them. Among the trees, shapes were moving in the darkness. They walked on all fours. But sometimes they stood up, standing on 2 legs. They were huge. They were very tall. Their eyes glowed in the dark. A sickly, yellow glow. Their shapes were indistinct. It was as if their bodies were constantly changing. They were furry creatures. Human-like, but not human. Animal-like, but not animal. Something that didn't fit into any category of nature. "What is that?" Simon's voice was trembling. I didn't answer, because I had no answer. Such a thing couldn't exist. It shouldn't exist. But it was there. "Run!" I shouted. We turned left, a hill, a descent, another turn, and then I saw the car. It was still there, in front of the tree, where we had left it. We ran. We ran with all our might. We reached the car, opened the doors, and jumped inside. I immediately locked the doors and started the engine. Frankie yelled, "There's a tree!" I know. I thought about backing up, accelerating, and crashing into the tree. Maybe we could push the tree out of the way and get through. I put it in reverse. I backed up. Then I hit the gas. I accelerated hard and slammed into the tree. With a loud crash, the tree shifted slightly to the side. It wasn't enough. I accelerated again and slammed into it again. The car tried to go over the tree, under it, around it. The car sustained some damage. The doors were scraped, the mirrors were broken, the paint was scratched. It was difficult, but we managed to get through. I looked back. In the mirror, I saw shapes standing behind the tree. They were just watching. They weren't following us. It was as if there was a boundary. They couldn't cross that boundary. I stepped on the gas and kept driving without stopping. By the time we reached the nearest town, Port Angeles, it was past midnight. We checked into the first motel we saw. Fear seemed to have taken hold of us. None of us said a word. What could we say? In the morning, we looked at the car in the garage. It was scratched and damaged all over. The mirrors were broken, the bumper was cracked. But worst of all, there was a thick, long hair on the front bumper. It was brown and looked like animal fur, but it was thicker. No one wanted to touch it. We thought about going to the police. But what would we say? No one would believe us. Maybe they would make fun of us. Maybe they would send us to a psychiatrist. We quietly returned to Seattle. I sold the car immediately. I threw that hair in the trash. But the smell was really bad. That smell lingered in my nose for weeks. 3 weeks later, I saw a news story online. It said, "Man lost in the woods found." A man who had lived in the woods for many years had been found dead in his cabin. The official cause of death was a heart attack, but the article mentioned a strange detail. There were thousands of scratches on the walls of the house, as if something from outside had attacked the house. I looked at the photo. It was the same man, the man who warned us. We never went camping again after that day. Frankie moved to another city. Simon never talks about that night anymore. Me? I still think about it. Every night I see those creatures in my dreams. I see those eyes. And worst of all, sometimes when I'm walking down the street, I feel like someone is following me. I turn around and there's no one there. But the feeling persists. A few days ago, a piece of paper was slipped under my apartment door. A handwritten note. Just one sentence. "You'll be back." I tore up the paper and threw it away. I don't know who wrote it. I don't want to know. But sometimes when I look out the window at night, I see a shape standing across the street. It only appears for a moment, then disappears. But in that brief moment, I can see its eyes glowing. And then I realize that our escape that night was no coincidence. They let us go. They allowed us to leave. Maybe they had a reason. Maybe we weren't ready yet. Maybe the game was just beginning. But now I know. If you come across a freshly cut tree in the Pacific Northwest forests, turn back. Don't look for help. Don't wonder. Just turn back and never look back again. Because in that forest, there are places not shown on the map. Places the GPS can't find, and in those places, things happen that humans can't comprehend. I saw it. And now, I know. The truth is much more terrifying than the stories. 6 months have passed. Life seems to have returned to normal. My job, my routines, everything is in its place. But something has changed. I have changed. Last week, Frankie and I met somewhere. We didn't talk about that night. We don't talk about it anymore. But I saw the same fear in his eyes. He was asking the same question. Was it real? It was real. All three of us know it. And that changes everything. When I wake up in the morning, the sun shines into my room. Birds are chirping. Everything is normal. But on the edge of the window, there's a small mark, a scratch, like a fingernail mark, but it's too big to be human. I don't touch it, I just look at it and smile, because now I know. They know me too, and this game will continue. But this time, I set the rules. This time, I'm ready. And who knows, maybe one day I'll return to that forest, to get my answers, to learn the truth. I'm Lewis, 42 years old, and for the past 4 years, I've been living alone in the northern forests of Montana. I used to be an engineer in Denver, but some things in my life didn't go as planned. And one day, I left everything behind and came here, to this little cabin. I came here to relax a bit and escape the chaos. Once I fell in love with this place, I didn't want to leave. Here, there's only nature and peace. I will tell you about an incident I experienced one November morning. That morning, I got up early, drank my coffee, and started chopping wood. As the cold November air filled my lungs, I chopped wood with an axe. With each blow, the sound of the wood splitting echoed through the forest, followed by that deep silence again. I loved this routine. The work of my body, the straining of my muscles made me feel physically good. I had placed a log and was just about to raise the axe when a strange sound reached my ears. The hum of a distant engine. A helicopter. Helicopters were quite rare in this area, but this sound was different. It was closer, more intense. The engine noise came in bursts as if it were choking. I dropped the axe and looked up at the sky. There it was. A black helicopter was among the trees. It was swaying from side to side, and a dark cloud of smoke was rising behind it. My heart began to race. The helicopter continued to descend, the engine noise growing louder. And then, right before my eyes, the helicopter plunged into the forest. It made a huge noise. There was the sound of trees breaking, followed by a terrible crash. I froze for a moment. Fear and excitement overwhelmed me. The helicopter had crashed into the valley about 2 or 3 kilometers away. It was densely forested and quite rugged terrain. It would take me at least half an hour to get there, but I had no other choice. If anyone was injured, every second counted. I immediately ran to the cabin, grabbed my first aid kit and my gun. Living alone in this forest, I always carried my gun with me, especially because of the possibility of encountering bears. I put on my thick jacket and grabbed my water canteen and radio. I started running towards where the helicopter had crashed. The leaves rustled under my feet. Branches scratched my face, but I didn't care. 1,000 scenarios ran through my mind. How many people were in the helicopter? Were there any injured? My breathing quickened. My heart was racing, but I didn't stop. I made my way through the trails, jumping over rocks and streams. 5 minutes later, the first clues began to appear. Broken tree branches, small marks on the ground, and fuel spills. There was a burnt smell in the air, and it smelled terrible. I started running faster. Then I came to an open area. The sight that met my eyes left me breathless. The helicopter was there, but it didn't look like a helicopter anymore. It was a pile of wreckage, completely shattered, lying on its side, its propellers broken. The surrounding trees were toppled. The ground was dug up, and metal fragments were scattered everywhere. The helicopter's side door was open, and worst of all, a thin plume of smoke was still rising from the rear. "Hey, is anyone in there?" I shouted, but there was no answer. I started running towards the wreckage, but just then I heard a sound. At first, I thought it was a human voice. It was a weak, pained moan. But then I heard another sound, a low growl, and that sound wasn't human. As I slowly approached the wreckage, I came to an angle where I could see the other side of the wreckage. There was movement there. A wolf. But not an ordinary wolf, a huge gray wolf. It was on top of an injured man. The man must have been thrown from the helicopter. He was lying on the ground, and the wolf was on top of him. The man's pilot uniform was torn. His body was bleeding, but he was still moving. But he looked weak and powerless. The wolf, on the other hand, was crazed with hunger, baring its teeth, growling, and trying to lunge at the man's neck. The man was trying to block it with his hands, but his strength was fading. The brain works very strangely in moments like this. Dozens of thoughts flashed through my mind in seconds. If I didn't intervene immediately, this man would die, but how could I intervene? The wolf was huge and aggressive. At this time of year, a helicopter crash was a feast for wolves, whose hunting had become difficult. It had been drawn by the smell of fresh meat, and this wolf showed no intention of giving up its meal. Its eyes were terrifying, and saliva was dripping from its mouth. "Hey, get out of here!" I yelled, waving my arms to distract it. My voice echoed through the forest. Under normal circumstances, wolves would be afraid of humans and run away. But this wolf just turned its head and looked at me. Its eyes were wild and ruthless, baring its teeth at me. Then it focused on the man again. "Get lost! Get out of here!" It was hungry and couldn't hear me. The wolf grabbed the man's chest, and he screamed in pain. I didn't have any more time. I reached for my waist and pulled out my gun. The 9mm Glock is the gun I always trust, but now I had to use it. My hands were shaking. I had used a gun for hunting before, but this time was different. I fired a shot into the air. The sound of the gun was deafening. The sound echoed through the forest, and the birds flew away in fright. The wolf looked at me first. Its ears pricked up, but it didn't run away. With an indifferent attitude, it started attacking the man again. I looked at the man. His eyes were open, and he was looking at me. His eyes showed helplessness, fear, and pleading. Cries for help came from his lips. His eyes were searching for someone to help him. He wanted to live and was struggling. I had to make a decision immediately. Otherwise, the wolf would eat the man. I raised my gun and took aim. The wolf was constantly moving, and the man was writhing beneath him. The target was very mobile. The wolf and the man were so intertwined that a clean shot was nearly impossible. But I had no other choice. Taking a deep breath, I steadied my hands. I aimed at the wolf's body and waited for the right moment. The wolf suddenly lunged sideways over the man, and at that exact moment I pulled the trigger. But the bullet didn't hit the wolf. It hit the man, right in his right foot, right on his ankle. The man let out a high-pitched scream from the pain, his voice echoing through the entire forest. No, I had hit the wrong target. My heart started pounding like crazy, and my stomach churned. But then something happened. When the wolf saw the blood on the man's foot, it lunged toward it. It got off the man and moved toward his foot. That's when I had my chance to shoot. I raised my gun again, this time more focused. The wolf's head was down, but its body was exposed. I took aim. I aimed at the wolf's body again. I took a deep breath. I couldn't miss this time. The man's life and my conscience depended on it. I pulled the trigger. Now I had hit the wolf, right under its ribcage. The wolf let out a terrible sound. It shook sideways. Was that enough? Number. The wolf was still standing, writhing in pain, but still a threat. It turned toward me, rage in its eyes. Damn it, now I was the target. The wolf growled low and took a step toward me. I fired a third shot. This time, I hit it in the shoulder. This time, the wolf was truly weakened. He took a few steps back, looking at me. There was no anger in his eyes now, only pain and fear. Then he started to run into the forest. He was limping, leaving a trail of blood behind him. I watched him until he disappeared among the trees, then lowered my gun. My hands were shaking. My whole body was shaking with adrenaline. I had accidentally shot the man I was trying to save. I felt guilty, but thanks to that wrong shot, the wolf's attention was distracted, and I was able to take a second shot. I immediately ran to the man and knelt beside him. His face was covered in blood. His uniform was torn, and there were claw marks on his arm and chest, and the ankle I had shot was bleeding profusely. But worst of all, there was a large wound on the left side of his chest. This wound was very serious. "Hey, look at me. My name is Louis. I'm going to save you, okay? But you have to stay with me. Keep your eyes open. I'm going to help you now." "What's your name?" "Marcus," he whispered. I opened my first aid kit. First, I had to stop the bleeding. The biggest bleeder was the large wound on his chest. I pressed gauze pads onto the wound. Marcus groaned in pain, but I didn't stop. Then I wrapped it with bandages. I wrapped it very tightly because the bleeding had to stop. Then I stood up. I looked at the wound I had caused. Even if it was an accident, I was the one who caused that wound. But thanks to that misfire, he was alive. I told myself this over and over. His ankle was in bad shape, but thankfully the artery wasn't severed. Still, it was bleeding heavily. I quickly wrapped gauze around it, trying to stop the bleeding. Marcus was moaning, but his voice was getting weaker. "Hey, stay with me," I yelled. "Marcus, is there anyone else in the helicopter?" Marcus shook his head. There was a pilot, but he died after we crashed. After bandaging his wounds, I had to lift him. It was 2 or 3 kilometers to my cabin from here. There was no other option. I had to carry him. "Marcus, I'm going to lift you," I said. "It's going to hurt a lot, but there's no other way." Marcus opened his eyes and looked at me. There was fear in his eyes, but also trust. He nodded. I took a deep breath and put his arms over my shoulders. Then I started to lift him. Marcus groaned, but I didn't stop. I put him on my back and stood up. My knees trembled, my back ached a little. I took a slow step. Then I continued walking, speeding up my steps a little. I could hear Marcus's breathing in my ears. The forest had never seemed so long to me. With every step, I grew a little more tired. Marcus's weight was crushing my shoulders, crushing my back. My feet were catching on rocks. Branches were scratching my face, but I didn't stop. Sweat was pouring down my face, and I was gasping for breath. Every now and then, I checked on Marcus. He was still breathing, but his pulse was probably weakening. I was racing against time. After walking a little further, I saw my cabin. With one last effort, I carried Marcus inside. I laid him on his bed. I immediately ran to my radio.
"This is Lewis Henderson, Northern Montana Forests. Urgent help needed. Helicopter crash. One seriously injured. One dead. Urgent ambulance. Urgent.
I gave my coordinates. The helicopter would be there in 20 minutes. I had to keep Marcus warm. I covered him with all my blankets. I held his hand. Marcus, help is coming. Just hold on for 20 more minutes. He opened his eyes and looked at me. His lips moved. You saved me. Not yet, but I will, I promise. The next 20 minutes felt like an eternity. I sat next to Marcus, constantly checking his pulse. Every minute felt like a lifetime. I was scared, but then I heard a sound. The sound of a helicopter. It was the sound of salvation. I rushed outside. A red and white helicopter was landing in the clearing next to the cabin. The helicopter landed and the doors opened. 2 paramedics and a doctor jumped out with a stretcher.
Inside! Come quickly!
The doctor knelt beside Marcus and immediately began examining him. Weak pulse, low blood pressure, severe blood loss. Give him intravenous fluids and oxygen immediately. Within minutes, Marcus was on the stretcher, hooked up to IV fluids and wearing an oxygen mask. The doctor turned to me. Your initial intervention kept him alive. You did a good job, but I shot him in the leg, I said. It was an accident while trying to shoot the wolf. The doctor looked at the leg wound. I wanted to tell him what happened. A wolf was attacking him, about to bite his throat. I tried to shoot the wolf but missed. I accidentally shot his leg, but then I got another chance and hit it with the second shot. The doctor looked at me, then shook his head. I understand. It was a very difficult situation. But in the end, you saved him. Don't worry, his leg will be fine. You did the right thing, Mr. Henderson. After that, I got on the helicopter with them. Marcus was lying on a stretcher, and the paramedics were checking the monitors around him. Oh, the helicopter took off. About 15 minutes later, we landed at the hospital. When we arrived at the hospital, Marcus was taken to the emergency room. The police came and took my statement. I told them everything about the wolf attack and how I accidentally shot Marcus. The police listened to me and then said, Mr. Henderson, you've been through a difficult situation. You did the best you could. You saved a life. Hours later, the doctor came out and gave us the news. Marcus is out of surgery. He's stable. He's going to live thanks to you. After that conversation, I felt relieved. Then I left the hospital. 2 weeks later, Marcus was discharged. He came to my cabin with his family. While drinking coffee, Marcus said, "The police told me everything. You shot me by mistake, but thanks to that, I survived. You gave me a second life, Louis. What you did was a brave act." Sunday mornings were sacred to me, and that morning, as usual, I woke up at 6 o'clock and was getting ready to leave our house on the outskirts of our small town in Oregon. Fishing was my greatest pleasure on Sundays. While my wife Erica was making coffee in the kitchen, I was checking my fishing rods and bait box, and my daughter Lucia was still asleep. After telling Erica I'd be home for dinner, I left the house. When I left town, the sun hadn't fully risen yet, but a pinkish light was beginning to spread over the forest, and I rolled down the car windows as I drove along that familiar dirt road. I continued, breathing in the scent of the forest outside. After a 15-minute drive, I arrived at the river where I always fished, got out of my truck, and looked around. Everything seemed normal. The river flowed calmly, and the morning chirping of birds filled the forest. I prepared my rods, baited them, and sat down by the water's edge, casting my line. The first half hour was quite calm. I caught a few small fish but released them because I was waiting for the big ones. Patience was the most important rule in this business. As the sun began to rise, the surface of the river turned a bright silver, and as I sipped my second coffee, I noticed a slight movement at the end of my line, but it didn't feel like a normal fish. It was something heavier. When I pulled the rod a little, I felt a weight on the line. I thought maybe the rod was caught on a log, but I was still curious. I continued to pull the rod slowly, and just then, something began to appear on the surface of the water. At first, it looked like a blurry shadow, but as it became clearer, my heart almost stopped. It wasn't a log, it was a human body, and I felt such a sense of fear that I almost dropped the rod. I immediately let go of the rod and jumped to my feet. My hands were shaking, and I was having trouble breathing because I had never encountered anything like this in my life. 1,000 questions were running through my mind. The body floating on the water was slowly drifting towards me. The current had brought it a little closer, and I could now see it more clearly. It was a man's body, face down, wearing a dark jacket. In a panic, I looked around, but there was no one else there. I was alone, left to face this horrific sight, but I knew I had to do something. I quickly searched around for a branch or piece of wood, and luckily found a thick tree branch on the shore. I took it and went to the water's edge and tried to slowly pull the body to shore, my hands still shaking, but I had to do what I had to do. When I pulled the body ashore, my stomach started to churn. The body had probably been floating in the water for a few days because the skin was discolored and swollen. From the facial features, it was clear he was a middle-aged man. I immediately took my phone out of my pocket and called 911. I told them, in a panic, that I had found a body in the river. They told me to stay calm and give them my location. I described where I was, and the operator said the police were on their way and that I shouldn't wait there. After hanging up, I moved a few meters away from the body and sat down on a rock. My hands were shaking, and my heart was racing. Anyone experiencing this moment would have their breath taken away, because the things you see on TV or in the news are much more terrifying and shocking in real life. About 20 minutes later, I heard police sirens and saw 2 police cars approaching. An ambulance was behind them. I got up and went to meet them. 2 police officers got out of the car, one tall and serious-looking, the other a young officer. I told them what had happened and led them to where the body was. One of the officers began examining the body and took photographs. The other took a detailed statement from me. He asked where I came from, when I arrived, whether I saw anyone else, and I answered as best I could. They asked me if I knew this area well. I told them I had been coming here for years and fished every Sunday. They also asked other questions about the river and the current. Later, when the forensic team arrived, they began examining the body. I waited nearby because the police might ask more questions. Also, I didn't feel like leaving and going home. I felt like I needed to stay there and find out what happened. Around noon, the forensic team removed the body, and the police approached me and thanked me. He gave me his business card, telling me to call them if I remembered anything else or noticed anything. When I got home, Erica and Lucia were watching TV in the living room, and when Erica saw me, she asked why I was so late. She stopped when she saw the look on my face. "Did something happen? You look worried." I sat down and told them what had happened. Erica was shocked. We talked a little that night, then went to our rooms to sleep. The incident had shaken me up a bit. I felt strangely uneasy. When I got into bed that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the body floating in the water. The next day, when I went to work, my mind was still on the incident, but I had to attend meetings and give campaign presentations. It was as if I was living in two different worlds. When I got home that evening, I saw the incident on the local news. The reporter was describing the story. He said that a man's body had been found in the river near the small town of Riverside, Oregon, that morning, and that the body had been identified. His name was Michael Torres. I sat down in front of the TV and started listening carefully. The reporter continued and said, even more alarmingly, that Mr. Torres's wife, Jennifer Torres, and their 9-year-old daughter, Sophie Torres, were also missing, and that the family had last been seen 3 days ago. A photo of the family appeared on the screen. It was a happy family photo, and it affected me deeply because this was no longer just a body. It was a family tragedy. The next day, one of the police officers called me and said they needed to talk to me. I took time off work and went to the police station an hour later. When I arrived at the station, several detectives took me to a small meeting room. There were maps on the table, and they asked me if I could show them the currents in that area and the possible points of impact. I leaned over the map and explained what I knew. I showed them where the currents were strong in the river, where vehicle tracks might be found, and which roads were close to the river. The police said the Torres family might have driven into the river. If so, Anne and her daughter could also be in the river. That afternoon, search and rescue teams began working on the river. A team of divers entered the water. Another team began scanning the upper reaches of the river by boat. I went back to work, but my mind was always there. The search continued for 2 days, and eventually the Torres family's car was found in the river. The vehicle was lying about 3 meters underwater, and the front end was completely damaged. Neither Jennifer nor Sophie were inside the car. This surprised everyone. If they had fallen into the river with the car, why weren't they in it? The police were now considering other scenarios, and perhaps it wasn't an accident, but something else. When I returned home tired on Friday evening, Erica had prepared dinner and Lucia was doing her homework. I lay down and turned on the TV, but the news was still about the Torres family. After dinner, Erica and Lucia went to bed early, but I wanted to stay in the living room a little longer because my mind was racing, and I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep. A light rain had started to fall outside, and as I looked out the window, my eyes were drawn to the darkness of the forest. At exactly 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Wondering who it could be at this hour, I headed for the door. Erica asked from upstairs who it was, and I said I didn't know. When I opened the door, the sight before me took my breath away. 2 women were standing at the door. One was in her 30s, the other a little girl. Both were soaking wet. Their hair was plastered to their faces, their clothes covered in mud. Their faces showed such exhaustion, as if they had been walking for days. When the woman looked at me, there was such deep fear and helplessness in her eyes that my heart sank. The little girl stood trembling behind her mother. She had a wet teddy bear in her arms. The woman said to me, trembling, "Help us." At that moment, her knees buckled and she almost fell. I immediately rushed forward and caught her. I knew who they were the moment I saw them. I had seen their faces countless times on television. They were Jennifer and Sophie Torres, the missing mother and daughter everyone had been searching for in the river. Now they were at my doorstep, alive and breathing, but with so many questions to ask. How had they survived? Why hadn't they gone to the police? And most importantly, how had they gotten here? Erica came running downstairs and was shocked to see them. We brought them inside immediately. I told my husband to get blankets. When I sat them down on the couch, Jennifer's lips were blue and Sophie's teeth were chattering. Erica quickly brought blankets and we wrapped them up. I said we should call an ambulance, but Jennifer suddenly grabbed my hand and said, "No, not yet. We're in danger and they're following us." She said this in a panic. I asked who was following them, but Jennifer didn't answer. She just looked around and asked if this place was safe. I said, "Yes, you're safe," but I didn't really understand what she meant. Sophie was sobbing, clinging to her mother, and Jennifer was comforting her, stroking her hair. They were both terrified. I said I had to call the police, but when I reached for the phone, Jennifer told me to wait. Erica gave them clean clothes and took them to the bathroom, telling them they needed a hot shower. After Jennifer and Sophie went to the bathroom, I started pacing in the living room. My mind was racing, and I didn't know what to do. These were people who had been missing for 3 days. Michael Torres was dead, his car had been found in the river, but these 2 women were alive and had come to my house. But how? I didn't know them at all. How had they found this place? Erica brought hot tea from the kitchen and told me I should call the police. I knew, but I said let's hear what they have to say first, because the fear in Jennifer's voice was real, and maybe there really was a danger. Half an hour later, Jennifer and Sophie came into the living room in clean clothes. They both looked a little better, but the worried look on Jennifer's face was still there. When the woman sat down, she thanked me and took a sip of tea. She said she was Jennifer Torres and the girl next to her was her daughter Sophie. "We know you from seeing you on TV. Everyone is looking for you." The woman shook her head. "I know, but we can't go to the police." When I asked why, Jennifer took a deep breath. Jennifer told me that the people who killed her husband were still out there, and that if they went to the police, they would find them. I asked her in astonishment what she meant, and Jennifer, trying to hold back her tears, said that Michael had been after something, that he had found some documents in the course of his work, and that they belonged to some very dangerous people. She said Michael hadn't told them some things to protect them. 3 days ago, when he came home in the evening, he was very tense. He immediately told them to pack their bags and leave the city. They got in the car and set off, and someone followed them. We didn't notice anyone following us. When we were on the forest road, another car came up behind us and started ramming into us. Michael lost control, and we veered off the road and rolled toward the river. When the car hit the water, Michael told them they had to get out through the windows. They broke the windows and got out, but he said the men came and tried to grab Michael. While trying to save Sophie, the men pulled Michael into the water, and I never saw Michael again. Jennifer explained that they swam to shore in the river. They fled into the forest with Sophie, and those men searched for them but couldn't find them in the dark. They had been hiding in the forest for 3 days, trying to find food. Jennifer added that they were afraid to go to the police. I was staring at her in shock. I was questioning myself if this was real because it was like a movie script. But real people were sitting in front of me, and they were truly terrified. When I asked how they got here, Jennifer said they saw my house while wandering in the forest. They watched me from afar. She said I looked like a good person, that I had a family, that I had a normal life. They had nowhere else to go. Erica looked at me and asked what we should do. "We need to call the police," I said. I picked up the phone and dialed the number on the business card. The phone rang for a long time, and finally, the police answered in a sleepy voice. I introduced myself and said it was a very serious matter. I told them to come here immediately, but to come alone. "Don't tell anyone. Jennifer and Sophie Torres are at my house right now and they're alive. They need to tell you some things." There was silence on the other end, and then the police said they would be there in 10 minutes. When the police arrived, Jennifer told them everything. She talked about the documents Michael had found, the fact that they were being followed, their car being run off the road, and Michael's murder. The police took notes and listened intently. Then he said these were very serious allegations, and that if they were true, they needed to inform the FBI. He immediately made some phone calls. Within an hour, other police officers and FBI agents arrived, and Jennifer and Sophie were taken to a safe place. Erica and I also gave statements. I couldn't sleep that night, and in the morning, the newspapers reported that the Torres case had grown. It turned out that the documents Michael had found belonged to a fraud ring, and they had killed him to silence him. Months later, when the case was closed, Jennifer called me and thanked me. She said I saved her and that she was grateful. I told her I just did what was right, but I had a strange feeling inside. Because when I went fishing in the river that Sunday morning, I never imagined my life would change so much. Life can sometimes confront you with the most unexpected things at the most unexpected moments, and you have to decide what to do in that moment. I made that decision, and now every Sunday when I go to the river, I don't just go fishing. I also think about what happened that day and how fragile life is. Because that river didn't just show me a body, it showed me the dark secrets hidden in the depths of life.